People are paying 2/3 of their property taxes to send their kids to school, not to learn about porn. We're here today to speak about the cringeworthy mandate that would require all curriculum to include discussions of sex education from kindergarten up to grade 12. The first video we're going to see today is a video that will be played to 5th graders.
Sometimes, young people will experience sexual pleasure and relieve stress and sexual tension by touching their genitals. That's called masturbation. It's very common for boys and girls. It's normal if you do it, and it's normal if you don't, and should always be done in private.
The fact that pornographic movies are being recommended to be taught to your 5th grader, is this really what you want going on in our schools? Is this what you want to be worried about while you're at work and you should be focusing on making a living so you can keep a roof over your head and food on the table for your children? I would think that most of the teachers that have went to school, they've gotten their degree, that they chose a path of educating our children, I would think most of them would probably be against this. And I think that the governor is now putting pressure on people to now make a choice whether or not they want to continue in their careers.
Teachers will tell you they are diverted from doing real academics with all of this non-academic nonsense. I'm getting emails, texts, friends of mine who are teachers are livid at the prospect of having to teach this material, and they feel a sense of responsibility for being the arbiters of this sort of damage.
It's important to talk with a parent, counselor, therapist, or doctor about the feelings you have regarding your gender. After some discussion and counseling, you may be referred to an endocrinologist. Endocrinologists specialize in hormones, and they are the most likely to prescribe puberty blockers for someone who wants them.
We need to keep our children innocent for as long as we possibly can. Starting to indoctrinate them on issues of picking a gender when they're barely figuring out what clothes to wear to school, this is going to put thoughts in children's minds that they don't need. What are we setting our children up for? What are we going to make them aspire to be? What thoughts are we going to put in their minds while their brains are just developing? There's so many outside social factors that are already take hold of our children with social media and YouTube and reality TV. So we already fight against those things. They need to concentrate on just being kids. They need to concentrate on playing outdoors or playing with Barbies. This narrative is not only extremely inappropriate, it's just plain wrong.
We should be putting up guardrails and giving certainty to children, not confuse them in their formative years. Childhood and psyches are very fragile, and when you introduce material like this and sanction it through the education system, you're really doing a disservice, and you could destroy young lives forever.
They're just learning how to read and write. They're learning how to tie their shoes. They're not thinking about what they want to be when they're 30 years old. They have no idea. Their brains aren't fully developed. So trying to inflict this narrative of, okay, you really want to be a boy when you're a girl, that's adults pushing this narrative on these young children.
Right, and to prescribe an actual medication that could alter their thoughts and also alter their development is very dangerous. To follow a whim that could be a fantasy, a normal childhood fantasy that doesn't go any further than the next day when they grow out of it.
Watching porn doesn't make you a bad person. It means you're curious. It's normal to want to know about sex and naked bodies. I mean, look at this guy's penis. Isn't it just unreal? Whoa!
Okay, so this is going to be proposed to 5th graders. The last thing that we need to be showing our children at that age is pornographic videos or pornographic pictures. If a softball coach or a babysitter was showing this to your child, I promise you that the police will be showing up at their doorstep.
Why are schools doing this? Schools are veering so far from the mission of academics. People are paying 2/3 of their property taxes to send their kids to school, not to learn about porn. And the whole defense of this sort of material is that it will teach children, if somebody touches them inappropriately, to say something. Well, for hundreds of years, parents have had that talk with their children. And they did it without showing porn. They did it without getting graphic. They did it in a way that was private and effective. Now we're going to look at a proposed lesson plan for first graders adopted by the New Jersey Board of Education. Identity starts with an I. That's how you can remember it. I feel, I know. Gender identity is that feeling of knowing your gender. You might feel like you are a boy, you might feel like you are a girl. You might feel like you're a boy even if you have body parts that some people might tell you are girl parts. You might feel like you're a girl even if you have body parts that some people might tell you are boy parts. Now, if you're confused, and I'm confused, imagine what a first grader would be hearing this material and having this thrown at them with no frame of reference to realize the absurdity of it. Children have imaginations by design. If you're telling them that these sort of feelings are based in any sort of reality, you are setting them up for disaster in future years.
You are putting thoughts into a young, developing mind that they would never have unless you started teaching this in the schools. These kids don't even know what they want for breakfast, let alone what they want for the rest of their lives. Parents need to advocate for their children. People need to rally together and get to the school boards and tell them this is not okay. We are not going to let the educators of the state of New Jersey tell us how we are going to raise our children or what's going to be taught to them in school, which, by the way, is being paid by our taxpayer dollars. We have a right and we have to stand united together.
You will notice that this lesson refers to girls and boys when identifying body parts. The use of a binary construct of gender, as well as using gender, boys and girls, rather than the more accurate biological sex, male and female, is purposeful, given the developmental stage of students. Lessons in higher grades use more precise language and begin to introduce a broader concept of gender. I'm an archaeologist, and archaeologists are scientists. When we excavate cemeteries, we identify remains as either male or female. There's no choice, there's no discussion, that's the way it is. To deviate from science is doing these children a great disservice. This is anti-science at its worst.
And think about the environment that's creating for a parent. Parents who believe in boys and girls, and that there's a difference, that they don't have to be biologists to acknowledge that their son is their son or their daughter is their daughter. Now they go to school and they're being taught this, and they come home and they say, Mommy and Daddy, I don't understand. Why are you telling me one thing, but my teacher's telling me something else? That creates a trust issue, and I have a problem with that. Teachers need to focus on teaching life skills to children, teaching them how to read and write, teaching them that 1 + 1 = 2, because there are two sexes. There's male, female, boy, and girl.
This is a Facebook post by Senator Vin Gopal reacting to the outrage of parents furious over the proposition of this material being taught to their young children. In response to multiple articles relating to curriculum education in our schools, I have read through the 66 pages of the Department of Education Guidelines 2020 New Jersey Student Learning Standards. Much of what I read in these articles is not in the guidelines. These guidelines are not being mandated. They are recommended. Any parent can opt their kids out of this if they choose to.
Parents shouldn't have to opt out for what they're paying for. Remember, it's our taxpayer dollars that are funding the schools. I want to ask him, does he have any children? What ages are they? And would he really be okay with his child watching a pornographic movie in 5th grade? I would be really hard pressed to believe that he would be okay with that.
The legislation never should have been drafted in the first place. And the legislation is very clear and very firm that this material shall be included in the curriculum. So if you ask your children or tell your children to opt out, you would have to opt out of every day because you never know what lesson it's going to show up in. Is it going to be physical education? Is it going to be history? Is it going to be a creative writing course? So this is really not the answer that you're allowed to opt out. Children deserve to have an education where they're not forced to opt out of any material being given. Children have the right to be in these schools and expect to be educated, not indoctrinated.
Here's a comment from a concerned parent to the senator's post.
What a cop-out. Aren't you the chair of the Education Committee? You expect us to believe you're just reading the guidelines now? No, you knew exactly what was in those guidelines and what doors it opened, yet clearly could care less about protecting children. Schools have no business discussing anything related to sexuality with 6- and 7-year-olds, period. Why are the Democrats so intent on sexualizing and grooming children? No wonder your last election was so close. Absolutely shameful. Amanda, you hit the nail on the head. Thank you for being brave enough to speak up. This is typical of the response that you get from parents when they hear the sort of tepid justification from people who voted yes for this particular legislation. 20 years ago, we would have laughed in anybody's face if they would have proposed this to teach children. Now, this is something that a political party actually, in the majority, voted for. What will be next? You have professors out in California lobbying to lower the age of consent. Is that what this is all about?
Amanda, I want to give you a shout out and let you know that we read these responses all the time. Me being a single mom, I've raised 2 children, it's very important that I am here in Trenton advocating for our parents and making sure that our children are protected in any way possible, especially in our schools. Melissa Brown Blauer, the Republican outrage machine, is saying young children are being indoctrinated with pornographic and derelict information. They are using the internet to churn out manufactured outrage and goose voter turnout to vote for Republicans. It is sickening. Well, Melissa, I have a message for you. You better believe that I'm going to rally up every parent, every non-parent that I know that believes in conservative values, that believes that our children should not be taught porn in 5th grade.
This is not just a Republican thing. I've heard from independents, unaffiliated, and many Democrats who think your party has gone off the rails. And this may be the final straw.
So Melissa, I think you should start looking at the voter records and see how many people are flipping to Republican or flipping to independent.
And Melissa, let me make it clear. This is not manufactured outrage. This is real outrage. Both of my kids are grown now, but I have 2 grandchildren who will be going to school in a year or 2. I will never allow them to be exposed to this sort of garbage.
The pressure is really building up. It's building up so much that Governor Murphy put out a press release.
Unfortunately, our learning standards have been intentionally misrepresented by some politicians seeking to divide and score political points. At the same time, we have seen a handful of sample lesson plans being circulated that have not been adopted in our school districts and do not accurately reflect the spirit of the standards. Any proposed educational content that is not age appropriate should be immediately revised by local officials. First of all, I want to point out, if anything that I or any of my colleagues have said that was intentionally misrepresented, I think the governor owes us at least to point out what it was and to correct it, not just spout rhetoric.
So this is coming from the guy who wanted to make the middle finger the state bird. So right there shows you how he feels about the state of New Jersey and, quite frankly, how he feels about the parents and the children of New Jersey. Governor Murphy, if somebody was taught showing this to your granddaughter or your daughter, I'm sure you'd have the police knocking on their front door if this was at somebody's house down in the basement. You need to make sure that it's taken out of the schools permanently. There should not be any proposals floating around with this type of material. The parents should decide what's age appropriate for their children. Let teachers be teachers and let parents be parents, and for God's sake, let children be children.